The sound of metal scraping against metal didn't just jolt me, it violated the very peace I'd worked so hard to find. I had just poured a fresh cup of coffee when I heard the unmistakable clink of keys twisting violently in my front door. I crept to the window, peered through the blinds, and froze. There she was, Victoria Harlow, the self-proclaimed queen of our street, kneeling on my porch, furiously trying to unlock my door with what she dramatically called a master key. When the lock refused, she snapped, pulled out her phone, dialed 911. Her voice rang out across the neighborhood. "There's a dangerous situation at 122 Maplewood Heights. He's refusing mandatory inspection. He might be hiding something." She had no idea the officer she just called was my son. And he wasn't just any cop, he was the sheriff, and he was on his way. "3 months ago, I left the chaos of the city behind for a fresh start in Maplewood Heights. It looked perfect, rows of tidy homes, towering maple trees, smiling neighbors waving from perfectly trimmed lawns. It felt safe, predictable, peaceful. My first week was lovely. Mrs. Patterson brought cookies. The Johnsons helped with the garbage schedule. Mr. Chen even offered me tomatoes from his garden. I'd finally exhaled. 30 years in a cubicle city siren's angry landlords, I thought I'd earned this quiet. But then, the warnings began. Soft at first, a whispered name during tea. "You'll want to watch out for Victoria," Mrs. Patterson said, glancing around like we were being watched. "She thinks she is the HOA. I smiled politely. How bad could one nosy neighbor really be? I was about to find out. It began with a note. Folded neatly under my windshield wiper, typed in Times New Roman like a letter from a government agency. "Your lawn is approaching the maximum allowable height under Maplewood Heights Community Guidelines." At the bottom, Victoria Harlow, Chairwoman Community Standards Committee. I chuckled. There was no HOA here, no committee. My grass was barely 2 inches tall. Still, I recycled the letter and went about my day thinking maybe she was just overzealous. But the next week, things escalated. I came home to a manila envelope on my porch. Inside were printed photos of my recycling bins, taken from multiple angles, clipped to another letter accusing me of early curb placement. The timestamp, 5:58 a.m. Pickup was at 6. I started feeling watched, like a target had been painted on my house, and Victoria Harlow was holding the brush. The final straw came in the shape of a gnome, a small smiling little guy I'd placed among the marigolds by my walkway. He wore a blue hat, held a tiny sunflower, meant nothing to anyone except me. I bought him with my late wife on a road trip to Oregon. He was cheerful, quiet, harmless, but not to Victoria Harlow. A new envelope appeared this time, demanding I remove the gnome immediately. Decorative lawn ornaments are prohibited under aesthetic compliance standards. Non-removal will result in fines. Fines, from whom that little gnome meant more to me than her entire fake rulebook. So I left him there. And just to see what she'd do, I added a tiny windmill next to him. It spun in the breeze like a middle finger made of plastic. That's when things stopped being petty. That's when Victoria declared war. It was a Tuesday morning when she showed up. Clipboard in hand, thrift store blazer, a measuring tape swinging from her belt like a sheriff's holster. She knocked 3 sharp, deliberate raps. I cracked the door, and there she stood. Victoria Harlow, eyes cold with conviction. "As acting HOA representative, I'm authorized to conduct quarterly inspections. You're due today." She waved a brass key in front of my face. "This is the master key. All homes in the community are subject to compliance checks." I blinked. Was she serious? She truly believed she had the authority to enter my home. No warrant, no real HOA, just her clipboard and bloated self-importance. I shut the door firmly, locked it, spoke through the wood. "You're not welcome here, ever." From the other side, her voice rose into a shriek. "You'll regret this." And with that, her heels stormed off my porch. But I knew. this wasn't over. It didn't stop at the store. Over the next 2 weeks, Victoria turned her obsession into a full-blown operation. She began parking at the end of my driveway every morning, always the same spot, always with the same smug look. From her car, she'd aim a camera at my house, not a phone, a professional DSLR, multiple lenses. She clicked like a wildlife photographer documenting a rare species, the non-compliant resident. One day, I watched her measure my mailbox post with a ruler. Another, she crouched near my flower beds, counting petals. I swear she used a measuring wheel on my porch railings. And, every evening, another envelope. Another list of invented violations. My favorite, your doormat color clashes with the neighborhood's approved palette. Approved by who, her imagination, I started keeping my blinds shut. The peace I once cherished was being invaded inch by inch. And Victoria was relentless. Then came the binder. Spiral-bound, glossy cover. Title in bold letters. Maplewood Heights. Community Standards Manual. She dropped it on every doorstep, mine included, like it was some holy scripture. Inside, charts, diagrams, pages of made-up rules about lawn height, hose placement angles, and the exact shade of beige you were allowed to paint your trim. It was impressive if you ignored the fact it was absolute fiction. And then there was the board. Victoria named herself Chief Compliance Officer. Brenda, her equally delusional friend from 2 streets over, became Director of Aesthetic Standards. They wore badges, real lanyards, plastic IDs, photos included. And they patrolled the neighborhood like they were guarding Fort Knox. The manual warned repeat violations will result in fines, liens, and mandatory compliance hearings. With who, just the 2 of them. At this point, I wasn't sure if I should laugh or start locking every window. One Saturday, a flyer appeared in my mailbox printed on colored paper with official-looking borders. Mandatory Community Standards Meeting, Saturday, 10 a.m. Park Pavilion. The agenda, new regulation proposals. Election of additional board members. Presentation on compliance violations. I showed up, out of morbid curiosity. 3 people were there. Victoria, Brenda, and poor Mr. Chen, who thought it was a real city meeting. Victoria stood behind a fold-out table with a podium and a PA system. She opened a manila folder, cleared her throat, and began reading from pre-written statements. We will now vote on the seasonal decoration policy and mailbox uniformity guidelines. Mr. Chen left halfway through shaking his head. Victoria! She carried on like she was addressing a packed auditorium. The next day, minutes of the meeting were taped to every door, including mine. I couldn't tell if it was delusion or theater. Either way, it was getting worse. A week later, it wasn't just flyers or fake meetings. Now we had scorecards, printed in color, laminated, posted without consent on every resident's door. Each home was assigned a letter grade A to F based on Victoria's self-created compliance metrics. I got a C. Apparently, my garden border lacked symmetrical alignment, and my porch light emitted a glare inconsistent with community ambiance. The Johnsons, B-. Their sin wind chimes audible beyond property limits. Even Mrs. Patterson, sweet and elderly, was slapped with a D for excessive ivy density on west-facing fence. The humiliation was intentional. Victoria wasn't just enforcing fake rules, she was publicly shaming anyone who didn't bow to her system, and people were scared. Curtains stayed drawn. Lawns mowed on schedule even in the rain. Halloween decorations vanished overnight. It felt like we were living under surveillance, not in a neighborhood, but in a regime. Then came the folders. Not just files evidence, bound with tabs and highlighters our lives dissected into accusations. Victoria called it the Violation Tracking System. Each home had a dossier. Mine was the thickest. She tracked my porch light's shadow like it was a threat. She claimed it was long-term oversight, but it felt like long-term invasion. One morning, Brenda whispered outside, clipboard in hand. "Lot 22 still hasn't fixed that mailbox lien. That's 2 demerits. They weren't neighbors anymore. They were wardens." Across the street, Mr. Chen stared at his front yard, sighing. "I've lived here 22 years. Never thought I'd be scared of planting begonias." I looked around and saw it clearly. Fear was growing faster than any lawn. And Victoria. She watered it daily with her rules. But something else was growing too. Not anger yet, but the beginning of it. You could feel it everywhere, like humidity that wouldn't lift. Maplewood Heights was suffocating. Mrs. Patterson now drank tea behind closed blinds. "She's always there," she whispered, watching, measuring. The Johnsons packed up their barbecue set. "Can't risk it. Smoke might drift." That's a violation now. Even kids avoided my sidewalk. One little boy tugged his mom's sleeve. "Why does the angry lady keep staring at our house?" Each morning, Victoria and Brenda patrolled like soldiers. Clipboards, matching lanyards, cold eyes, people adjusted, trash bins tucked in like contraband. Garden tools disappeared, and door wreaths once cheerful vanished overnight. The street was quiet. Too quiet. Not peaceful, but tense. I stood at my window watching lives shrink. I wasn't just a target anymore. We all were. And as I clenched my mug tighter, I whispered to myself, "This is not what I moved here for." The silence didn't last long. It cracked softly like thawing ice. It started with Mrs. Patterson. She stopped whispering. She cited my daffodils, she said, handing me the notice. Said they were chaotically vibrant. The Johnsons received a warning for flagpole misalignment. Seriously. Even Mr. Chen, usually calm, muttered, "This isn't a neighborhood. It's a stage, and she's the only one playing." Then came the questions. Do we actually have an HOA? Is any of this legal? We didn't answer, not out loud, but the nods, the sighs, the tired glances, they were agreement. We weren't angry yet, we were tired, worn, but we were waking up. Because sometimes tyranny doesn't arrive in boots, it arrives with a clipboard. And I realized Victoria's power only worked as long as we believed in it. So I stopped obeying, and I started watching. I stopped throwing away her letters. Instead, I filed them. I started a folder marked Victoria Harlow and slid every ridiculous notice, every photo, every false violation neatly inside. Then I added timestamps, screenshots, video clips. I positioned a camera above my porch, angled discreetly. I didn't want confrontation. I wanted proof. Every morning, I'd sip coffee while watching her patrol clipboard tucked under her arm like a weapon. Sometimes she muttered to herself. Sometimes she took pictures of my windows. Once she crouched in my bushes measuring the distance between 2 solar lights. I hit record. By the end of the week, I had a solid hour of footage. Crystal clear. Date stamped. She didn't know it yet, but every step she took on my property was another nail in the coffin she was building for herself. And I was just getting started. It was a Thursday afternoon. Cloudy. Quiet. Then 3 knocks. I opened the door to a man I'd never seen before. Mid-40s, athletic build, plain gray polo, no ID. "I'm with the HOA," he said flatly, "sent by Chairwoman Harlow for an inspection." I looked past him, no car, no clipboard, no tools, just a hard stare and clenched fists. "Got a problem with your shed. Possible code violation," he added. Stepping forward, I didn't move. "Unless you'd rather I report this to someone less polite," I smiled. There was a camera recording right above us, and, in my pocket, my phone already recording audio. I stepped back, closed the door without a word, and called Michael. I didn't know what this man's real purpose was, but I knew one thing for certain: Victoria wasn't just playing games anymore. She was sending messengers. 2 days later, I found a manila envelope taped to my front door. The heading read, "Final Notice. legal action pending. Below that, the seal of the county sheriff's office, or so she thought. It was all wrong. The fonts were off. The seal was pixelated. The language awkward like it had been pulled from a legal drama on TV. Failure to comply with HOA-mandated inspections will result in civil charges as per Ordinance 47B, Community Order Enforcement Act. There is no Ordinance 47B. At the bottom, a signature. Sheriff Michael H. Cooper, my son. She had forged my son's name, with a fake title, fake seal, and fake authority. I held the paper in my hands, heart pounding not with fear, but with fury. Victoria Harlow had just committed a felony, and this time there would be real consequences. This time she didn't send a letter. She came herself. 3 sharp knocks. I opened the door 2 inches, just enough to see her face. Victoria stood there, clipboard in hand, a tape measure looped around her neck like a badge of honor. "We've received multiple non-compliance reports," she said coolly. As chairwoman, "I'm executing an emergency inspection." Her hand hovered over the same brass key she'd tried before. I didn't flinch. "Step off my property," I said calmly. "You have no authority, no legal right." Her smile twitched. "Just slightly. Refusal will escalate the matter. You will be fined, prosecuted, by who you silence." Then her eyes narrowed, voice rising. "You'll regret this, I promise you that." "Not today," I said and shut the door in her face. The wood clicked shut, but the war still wide open. She didn't leave quietly, not Victoria. As I sipped coffee behind the blinds, I saw her pacing my front porch, phone held high, camera facing her. She was live streaming. "I'm here at 122 Maplewood Heights," she announced, voice full of righteous fury. "The homeowner is refusing lawful inspection. We have reason to believe there are hazardous materials inside." "What? This is a danger to the community. I'm documenting everything for legal purposes." Neighbors peeked out from windows. Some stepped onto porches. I saw Mrs. Patterson cross her arms. I hit record on my phone. She wasn't just spinning lies, she was building a digital case of self-incrimination. "This is what HOA enforcement looks like," she said dramatically. "Oh, Victoria, you just turned this into public theater. And I've got front row seats." That live stream was her mistake. She thought it made her look powerful, authoritative. But something shifted. You could feel it. Neighbors didn't cheer her on, they closed their doors. Mrs. Patterson stood at the edge of her lawn, arms folded, gaze sharp. Mr. Chen stepped out, looked at Victoria, and shook his head. The Johnsons whispered across their porch, eyes darting toward her phone. Brenda, her loyal lieutenant, looked uncomfortable for the first time. I watched it all unfold like a slow-motion collapse. Victoria waved her phone with theatrical flair, but no one spoke. No one supported her. They were done. Not quite rebelling, not yet. But something stronger. They stopped believing. And when power loses belief, it begins to crack. I went inside, printed 3 still frames from her video, and slid them into my file. Her voice was louder than ever, but now she was alone. It arrived like a declaration of war. A thick envelope taped to my door in red ink. Final notice. Compliance deadline, 72 hours. Inside was a typed letter, 3 pages long, stamped with a fake county seal, and signed, of course, by Victoria Harlow and Chief Officer Brenda. It outlined an entire fake process, 72-hour grace period. Emergency inspection authorization. Mandatory access for community safety review. It even cited imaginary regulations under subsection 12.4 of the Maplewood Heights Emergency Oversight Code. There is no such code, but, to Victoria, it was law. The letter ended with one bold line. If homeowner refuses entry, enforcement will proceed without consent. I read it twice. She wasn't bluffing anymore. She was planning to break in, and now I wasn't just preparing to stop her. I was preparing to expose her once and for all. It happened at 2:14 p.m. I was in the kitchen slicing an apple when I heard it. Metal against metal. That same scraping, clicking sound from weeks before, only louder, angrier. I froze, tiptoed to the door, peered through the peephole. And there she was, Victoria Harlow, kneeling, gripping a brass key, forcing it into my front lock like she was cracking a safe, muttering to herself, "This is official inspection protocol. I have authorization." She jiggled the knob, pressed her shoulder against the wood, whispered something about enforcing community order. I reached for my phone, hit record. My porch cam caught the rest. She wasn't just trespassing anymore. She was attempting to commit a felony. In broad daylight. On camera. I watched in silence, heart steady, eyes cold. She thought I was afraid, but I wasn't hiding. I was waiting. I expected her to run. Instead, she stood, brushed off her knees, pulled out her phone and dialed. She wasn't hiding anything. She wanted me to hear it. "Yes, I'd like to report a public safety emergency," she said loudly, pacing my porch like a performer on stage. "The resident at 122 Maplewood Heights is refusing a mandatory inspection. I believe he's harboring unsafe materials inside his home. Possibly hazardous. Possibly illegal." Her voice echoed down the street. Neighbors peeked from windows again. Mrs. Patterson stepped outside, frowning. I stood just behind the door, silent, recording everything. She wasn't panicking. She wasn't even nervous. She was smug, like she thought the cops would come and drag me out in handcuffs. She had no idea who was about to walk up that driveway, and no idea just how poetic karma can be. Minutes later, I heard it. The low, steady rumble of a patrol car rolling down the street. Victoria stood tall on my porch, straightening her blazer like she was about to receive an award. Across the lawn, neighbors gathered again. Whispers spread. Blue and red lights bounced across windows. Tires crunched the gravel. Then, silence. The car door opened. Boots hit pavement, measured unhurried steps. A tall figure approached, adjusting his belt, one hand resting casually on his hip. Victoria turned toward him, full of righteous fury. "Officer?" "Thank God. I've been trying to enforce a mandatory inspection. This man is putting the neighborhood in danger." She pointed at my door like it was glowing. I stayed still behind it, phone in hand, lips pressed together, because I recognized those footsteps. I knew that walk, and Victoria. She was seconds away from losing everything. He walked slowly, not rushed, not aggressive, just calm, steady, like someone who knew exactly who he was and exactly what was about to happen. Victoria took a step forward, already mid-sentence, already unraveling her script. "Officer, thank you for coming so quickly. The resident here is refusing lawful HOA inspection. He's been—" Then she saw his face. She blinked once. Her mouth opened-closed, then opened again, no sound. The color drained from her cheeks, replaced by a flicker of realization that spread like ink in water. He didn't flinch, just looked her in the eye and said plainly, "Good afternoon, ma'am. What seems to be the emergency?" His voice was steady, professional. Her eyes darted between him and my front door, because in that moment she understood. The man standing before her, the law she'd just called for, was my son, and karma had arrived in uniform. Victoria swallowed hard, but she pushed forward because people like her always do. Yes, I have documentation," she stammered, reaching into her oversized leather folder. "I have the manual, violation records, photos of his garden gnome." And Michael held up a hand, calm but firm. "Ma'am, I need to see any legal documentation that grants you inspection authority or the right to enter this residence." Her fingers trembled slightly as she pulled out a wrinkled sheet complete with a fake letterhead, a clip art logo, and a stamp clearly bought from an office supply store. Michael took it gently, scanned it once, then looked up. Not angry, not amused, just done. "This isn't legal," he said flatly. "None of this is." Victoria's jaw clenched. She looked around, realizing eyes were watching, and for the first time, she had no script left. Michael took a breath. Then, in that calm, unwavering tone I'd heard since he was 12 and telling the truth with more weight than most adults, he began listing quietly but clearly. Attempted unlawful entry, impersonating a government official, falsifying legal documents, filing a false emergency report. Each word landed like a hammer. Victoria didn't interrupt. She couldn't. She just stood there, frozen, her hands still clutching the edges of her ridiculous folder like it could somehow shield her from consequence. "Ma'am," he continued, "you do not represent any legal HOA. This community has no registered association. What you've done, creating false authority, issuing fake citations, attempting forced entry. It's not just unethical." He paused. "It's criminal." Silence wrapped the block like plastic. No laughter, no gasps, just the sound of a woman's delusion collapsing in real time. And all I could think was, justice doesn't always knock. Sometimes it shows up wearing your last name. As Michael stood his ground, the neighborhood began to stir. One by one, front doors creaked open. Mrs. Patterson stepped onto her porch arms, crossed, no longer hiding behind lace curtains. The Johnsons appeared beside their mailbox, their little girl clutching her father's hand. Even Mr. Chen, who hadn't said a word in months, walked slowly to the edge of his lawn. Eyes narrowed, mouth set in a quiet frown. No one spoke. They didn't have to. Their presence alone was a verdict. Victoria looked around, the last of her bravado draining with every gaze she met. Not angry shouts, not cheering, just stillness, the kind that says, "We've had enough." She gripped her clipboard like a lifeline, but it offered no authority here. Not anymore. This wasn't her kingdom. It was a neighborhood waking up. And now, finally, we were all looking the same direction. At her. Michael reached into his jacket, pulled out a clipboard of his own, real not imagined, and began writing. Each stroke of his pen echoed louder than Victoria's months of shouting. "Full name?" he asked. She hesitated. "Victoria Harlow," she whispered, her voice so often sharp, commanding now barely a breath. Michael read the charges aloud, clearly and evenly, like it was procedure, which of course it was. False reporting, criminal trespass, impersonating a public official, attempted unlawful entry. Then came the paperwork, formal citations, court summons, written acknowledgement of investigation. Victoria sat down right there on the curb. No handcuffs, no shouting. Just her and the weight of every lie she'd built. She looked smaller than I'd ever seen her. Not because she'd been arrested, but because for the first time she was simply seen for what she really was. A pretender finally caught in her own performance. It spread faster than her flyers ever did. News anchors recited her crimes over dinner broadcasts. Clips went viral. Victoria, flustered, claiming HOA rights that didn't exist. Fake HOA, queen faces, real charges. After home invasion attempt. Neighbors watched her photo circle the web knees on the curb, clipboard drooping. Pride shattered. But what struck me most wasn't her collapse. It was how quickly the neighborhood came alive again. People who'd tiptoed for months now laughed openly. Mrs. Patterson baked for the block. Mr. Chen fixed his wind chimes. And the Johnsons. They hung red, white, and blue streamers all over their porch. Victoria faced charges trespassing, impersonation, fraud. Her community manual was now state's evidence. Her compliance reports punched and shredded. And the street that once feared her, now it just pitied her. She hadn't just lost her control. She lost the illusion that she ever deserved it. Peace came back. Slowly. Not with music or parades, but with permission to breathe. I remember the morning it hit me. No clipboard clicks, no staged photo ops, just sun filtering through the porch railings. Mrs. Patterson waved garden gloves on dirt under her nails. "Feels good, doesn't it?" she smiled. To plant without asking. The Johnsons grilled steaks. Mr. Chen's radio played jazz again. And me, I walked to the nursery. Found a new gnome. Tiny sheriff badge on his vest hands confidently behind his back. I placed him beside my old gnome under the marigolds, my wife's favorite. Then I sat. No tension in my shoulders, no need to watch the street. Just quiet. I wasn't guarding my home anymore. I was enjoying it. That porch finally felt like mine, because when justice settles in, it doesn't scream. It simply stays. Power doesn't always wear a badge. Sometimes it hides behind clipboards, fake stamps, and louder voices. But real authority speaks softly and stands when it matters most. This wasn't just a story about a delusional neighbor. It was about boundaries, about how far someone will go when no one tells them to stop, and how everything changes when just one person finally does. In the end, it wasn't anger or revenge that brought peace back to Maplewood Heights. It was truth, backed not by noise, but by evidence, patience, and quiet strength. We all deserve to feel safe in our homes, to plant what we love, to decorate our porches with memories, not fear, and sometimes, all it takes is one gnome in a sheriff's hat to remind us, no one rules a neighborhood, not when neighbors stand together. Have you ever dealt with a Karen in your neighborhood, or witnessed someone's overinflated ego get a much-needed reality check? Share your own justice-served stories or HOA nightmare experiences in the comments below. Let's hear how karma found its way home. And if this story brought a smile to your face, hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe for more tales where entitled power gets put exactly where it belongs.